Well, good morning, everybody. It's Sunday, 31st of May, last day of the month, technically June. We're into one of the summer months, and we've missed the entire spring through lockdown. So I'm here, Kevin Williams, to keep you company with Elevenses whilst we try to get back to something approaching a normal life. What's in the show? Well, I'm going to be talking about MotoGP, which is off, but why some of the European rounds could still be going ahead. Sadiq Khan is under fire here in London for ignoring bikes, so I'll talk about that story. We'll have a quick look at the Tricity 300 from Yamaha as well. We'll have a couple of dinosaurs, have a look at those as well. And I'm going to finish off with a bit of a discussion about what we need in terms of motorcycles, in terms of size and speed, but also talk about why we need to understand something called thrust. So stick with me till the end of the show, and we'll be talking about that. Don't forget, if you have any comments, any questions, add yours and I'll get back to you when I come off air. If you've got any feedback, I'm always interested to hear it. And if you've got suggestions for something that you'd like me to cover in a future show, do drop me a line. Been a bit short on suggestions just recently. Does that mean nobody's watching? I hope a few of you are, but yeah, drop me a line. Okay, so on with the local news here in the UK. Last Wednesday, I mentioned that the ACU are suggesting that the UK could possibly see some live bike racing again in July. But yesterday, it was announced that the Silverstone round of the MotoGP Championship, the world event, which was scheduled for August, has actually been cancelled. Now, Silverstone's boss Stuart Pringle said in a statement that obligations to protect the health and safety of everyone involved in preparing and delivering the event means that this is the best, safest and only decision we could make. Pringle added that ticket holders who've already bought a ticket for this year can either get a refund or transfer their ticket forward to the 2021 event. And they also, as a goodwill gesture, they intend to give away what they call thousands of tickets for the 2021 event to NHS workers and other key workers who have literally putting their lives on for us all during these challenging times, which is decent of them. Details of the refund process are due to be announced in the next couple of weeks. So if you do have a ticket for the event, hang on to it to see how that'll work. He said that we're extremely disappointed about the cancellation of the British MotoGP event, not least as the cancelled race in 2018 is still such a recent memory. But we support the decision that has had to be taken at this exceptional time. I must admit, I completely forgotten about the 2018 cancellation. That, of course, was due to flood water rather than coronavirus or anything else like that. Another victim of the global pandemic is Australia's round, which was due to be held at Phillip Island in October. That has also been cancelled already. Somewhat ironically, this weekend's virtual Grand Prix is due to take place on a digital rendition of Silverstone. You may recall that I've mentioned these a couple of times now. These stay-at-home Grand Prix are taking place on Sundays, and with the Italian GP on hold this weekend, a number of the racers from all three classes, MotoGP, Moto2 and Moto3, will be up against each other using the latest MotoGP 20 video game. And as the statement says, it's proved a fun few hours for racing fans as they're streamed across social media. You can either find them on the MotoGP site or they're on YouTube. And this week's race is due tomorrow at 2. To be honest, I was surprised at the level of skill that the riders have shown. Now, that may just be that MotoGP riders spend a lot of time playing PlayStation when they're not riding their motorcycles. But what really interested me was actually following their lines through the corners. They are almost exactly as they would be using if they were on real bikes. Now, you'd expect that from the dynamics of the bikes and the tracks. They don't change. That's the whole point of building a sort of a simulator game like this. But the ability to actually control the machine using a joystick isn't the easiest thing in the world. I've had a few dabbles with various Moto GP and Superbike games in the past, and I could honestly say that I can barely complete a lap on the circuits. So there's a definite skill level involved. Possibly some of it is down to familiarity with the circuit and knowing exactly where you're aiming the bike. I'd suggest that probably some of it is, but it's quite impressive to watch. Even if they do manage to get up much more quickly than the normal rider would do when they do fall off. So that's Sunday at 2, just in case you're interested. Don't forget, you are watching Kevin Williams here with Elevenses, and this is my survival skills show, keeping you all entertained while most of us are still probably locked down. I'll be putting a post up later, actually, just asking for some feedback on who's actually watching, who's working, and who's watching on catch up later. So keep an eye open for that, and feedback would be useful. So if you could answer that, that'd be great. You may be wondering why Silverstone is still working towards hosting 2 rounds of the Formula One series. We're not quite on bikes here, but it's close enough. If they've just cancelled the MotoGP round, well, the answer to that is that many of the F1 teams are actually based in the UK. So they wouldn't have to cross borders, basically, to get up to the circuit for these closed door events, which are provisionally scheduled for July. So getting the technical personnel to a MotoGP event in the UK, by contrast, is much more tricky, because the GP squads are all based in mainland Europe. And although it's yet to be confirmed, it does appear that MotoGP are planning to run European races, and they would be 2 races at Jerez. They'd be moving on to Brno. They've got 2 races planned at the Red Bull Ring in Austria and Misano in Italy. So with a bit of luck, we will get some live action on the circuits. Other possible circuits are Spain's trio, Aragon, Barcelona, and the Valencia circuit. They could all host races, and if they do that, we'll basically have a championship of 10 live races. They'll all be broadcast live on TV, but each event will be basically run with a skeleton crew, and there'll be no media present other than the camera operators, presumably, and that'll keep the number of people traveling to and on the site at a minimum. And presumably the car Grand Prix, which would likely be held at Silverstone, will be run under exactly the same kind of conditions. Beyond that, there is talk that there could be races outside of Europe, and the venues being suggested are the Circuit of the Americas in Texas, Thailand, Malaysia, Japan, and Argentina. They're all on a provisional calendar to possibly happen between October and November, but the organisers say that there's a big difference. Those races can only take place with spectators present because of the flyaway costs to get to those events, and the problems of holding a race with a large number of spectators is an obvious one. So they'll be making a decision on that later on, probably in September, according to the news. Meanwhile, here on home turf, organisers of the British Superbike Championship are expected to announce their plans next week as to whether they'll be running a series again, probably behind closed doors. But Club Racing Championships are already looking at ways to recommence their racing. I mentioned on Wednesday that they're opening up training sessions for riders almost immediately. They're looking to see how they can get going again with social distancing. Now, to be honest, the average crowd at a superbike event in the UK hasn't been in the tens of thousands as it was back in the heyday, maybe 15 years ago, when there were enormous crowds at these races. They've dropped right off. You watch superbike racing at most British circuits these days, and whilst there's still, people there, Cadwell Park in particular seems to turn out a big crowd. A lot of the events are fairly sparsely attended these days. Most people stay home and watch it on TV, and which is fair enough. But for club racing, the attendance is in tens or hundreds. It's far from being thousands of people. So, and that can apply to some of the lower tier national events like the Thundersport Championships. Thunderbikes, is it called? I can't remember. I go and watch it occasionally myself. But it would seem to me that, around the track, there'd be no problem with social distancing. There's plenty of empty space on a motorcycle circuit to stand and watch. But the problem is the facilities. Something like the ticket entry, somebody has to be there to collect your ticket. Toilets, there are a limited number of sort of facilities, and food outlets. If people want to get something to eat and drink at the circuit, then again there is a sort of a pinch point, a bottleneck where people come together. So there clearly has to be some careful thought going into this. Okay, so don't forget, if you want something to read during the lockdown, if you're still off your bike, you can head over to my Spotlight page at Lulu and pick up one of my paperback books over there. They're all still available. They are all being printed. The site seems to be getting back to normal after the badly timed upgrade, which broke it completely. But you can order those now, I hope, online. So I'll give yourself something to read, and it will help me with a bit of income, which will be great. So, okay. What else have we got? We'll be looking at the Tricity three-wheeler in just a moment, and I'll be rounding off the show by talking about the power and torque and something called thrust, which is probably the most important figure of the lot, and it's the one that you never hear about. So stay tuned for that. But first of all, on to Sadiq Khan, and you probably know he's the mayor of London. Now, you know that I've been talking about how the MCIA have got together with organisations like Motorcycle Action Group and the British Motorcycling Federation and even the Trail Riders Federation. And the latest to join is the Vintage Motorcycle Club. They've got together in a sort of a confederacy to try to push motorcycling higher into the awareness of the people planning how we're going to deal with post-pandemic Britain. And here in town, London, the mayor, Sadiq Khan, has been accused of ignoring the benefits of powered two-wheelers in the capital's latest transport strategy. Now, under this new strategy, Transport for London, TfL, has grouped motorbikes and scooters in with cars, taxis, and construction traffic. And this, the critics claim, is ignoring the benefits of powered two-wheelers, but also potentially puts motorcyclists at risks. I'll come on to that one in just a moment. We then have the usual claims that P2Ws, powered two-wheelers, have been shown to reduce congestion, take up less road space, cause less air pollution. As I said before, I don't think there's any doubt that if you substitute a bike for a car, it takes up less space. That's blindingly obvious. And if you can flow more vehicles along a road, then you cause less congestion, and there is some evidence, although the usual claim is based on one single computer simulation that was carried out by a group which applies to one single road in Belgium, I believe it was, a short stretch as well. So there is still questions to be asked there, making broad sweeping claims based on one tiny study is dubious, and the claim about causing less air pollution is a distinctly iffy one. As I've said before, we really do have to treat that one with some precaution, because equivalent age motorcycles are not as clean as cars of that same era, simply because motorcycles have lagged behind in the Euro standards of tailpipe emissions. Now we finally caught up, so the bikes on sale that you'll buy today with the possible exception of a few older models which are hung over from last year. A modern motorcycle with the Euro 5 standard will produce the same tailpipe emissions as an equivalent car if the fuel consumption matches. And this again is an issue for motorcycles. You can get a Super Mini, which will do 50 plus mpg quite easily, and a lot of motorcycles will struggle to match that once you get up sort of 500 600 cc. You'll get something like a CBR 600, which will give you maybe 50 if you're keeping the speed down. You can get something like a CB 500, which will give you rather more, something 60 odd, and you can get the NC 750 series, which will rack up 80 mpg quite easily. Sorry, I don't think in litres per 100 kilometers or anything daft like that. You'll have to deal with me in miles per gallon. But the point is, you can quite easily get a powerful motorcycle commuting into London, which is struggling to get anywhere near the fuel consumption of an equivalent petrol engine car. And we're not even starting to talk about hybrid vehicles at this point. I did 1,000 miles plus around California in a hybrid just February, just before we all got involved in the pandemic, and I was really impressed with the vehicle. It gave way over 60 mpg on a whole series of mixed driving, everything from freeways to negotiating mountain roads to getting stuck in LA city centre traffic. And trust me, if you think the traffic is bad in London and other big cities in the UK, try Los Angeles. It's a different kettle of fish. And that was over 60 mpg on that entire journey. So cars can be very economical, and the only way we're going to match that is with smaller cc or lower powered motorcycles like the NC series. Anyway, back to the mayor. It all goes back to a statement that the mayor made before he was elected. He said, to quote, "It is absolutely right for us to enable PTWs, power two-wheelers, to play their part in delivering a less congested road network." Now, that's what he said. What's happened? Well, predictably, one of the groups who've taken up the cudgel, as it were, was the Motorcycle Industry Association. And they claim that London is not taking into account the needs of motorcycles. And Tony Campbell, the CEO, who actually I watched on an interview the other day, who was a very reasoned actually approach. Quite impressed with the way he said what he said. But talking about the mayor, he said that he clearly has his own agenda around motorcycles and scooters, which was not made clear to the riders who elected him, following his promise to champion their contribution to reducing London congestion. Excuse me. At a recent meeting with the MCIA, the mayor said that he agreed PTWs had an important part to play. And in doing so, he also agreed to review his transport strategy, taking into account the feedback he'd received during the consultation period. Campbell quoted the mayor's response to this. "I've read through the industry's response to my transport policy document and can say I agree with most of what you're saying, not all, but most." So Tony Campbell's expressed disappointment with that and says basically that the mayor needs to rethink his strategy. He says the MCIA strongly urges the mayor to take another look at his plans, not only to fulfill his pre-election commitment to riders and London voters, but also to honour his words at the recent industry meeting. However, there is one odd statement in that press statement which I don't understand. It says, with PTWs being placed in the same category as other vehicles, there is the potential for more road accidents to occur. Now, I can't understand that. That doesn't make sense to me. What's it suggesting? That motorcycles should be in a separate category from other powered vehicles? How would that reduce casualties? Simply putting things in a different box doesn't reduce categories. grouping things together in a box doesn't increase casualties. So how does that put riders at more risk? I don't understand. My best guess is that the statement is aiming at allowing more access to bus lanes. There is some evidence that motorcyclists using bus lanes are somewhat less at risk from collisions than riders who are trying to filter outside a lane of traffic, for example. But I'm not sure how the mayor can actually do anything about this, because TfL, which is controlled via the mayor's department, they already allow access to all their bus lanes. If you ride in London, you'll find regularly when you're heading down a major road that the sign has a little motorcycle on it. Those are almost all TfL controlled bus lanes. TfL controls major routes across and around the capital. What it doesn't control are the less important roads. We'd still treat them as, or class them as main roads, but they happen to be under control of local councils. And now it's down to the individual local council to make a decision about whether or not those motorcycles can access those bus lanes. A few have opened up limited numbers of bus lanes, but the vast majority are still closed to bikes. So how that can be dealt with by the mayor, I don't understand. Presumably he could make suggestions to local councils to do something about it, but again, it's entirely up to what the local council votes on that. Another possibility is that the MCIA are suggesting that TfL should pay more attention to rider training. Now, one thing you probably have noticed is that an awful lot of riders in London on L plates, which means they have only taken CPT and they have no training to test standard. Now, test standard is considered to mean that you are capable of riding at a reasonable standard with other traffic. CPT is a sort of a weird hangover from the days when motorcyclists were allowed to ride on L plates when nobody else was, and the industry have fought hard to retain the right to ride on L plates because obviously it helps them sell the 125s. But the fact is, go and look at the statistics, it's quite easy to prove that riders riding around on L plates are higher at risk than riders who've passed their test, particularly in the first few months of being on the bike. So we have to really question whether CPT is adequate preparation. So I would say that that's not exactly the TfL's problem. It's not exactly the mayor's problem. It's actually the way that the industry has fought to keep L plate riders. What have TfL been doing about it? Well, again, you probably don't know this because it made very little waves within the industry, and it certainly didn't get out into the public's attention. But TfL have actually been running heavily subsidized post-CPT training, top-up training, for several years. Guess what? The uptake of those courses has been close to zero. Hardly anybody has bothered. Motorcyclists think they've already spent money getting CPT. They now have that right to ride on L plates. Why spend more money to do what they can already do? Well, the answer is, of course, because motorcyclists crash and because L plate riders are particularly at risk. So in some ways, the problem here isn't Sadiq Khan and the mayoralty and what TfL are doing. It's motorcyclists themselves are sometimes their worst enemies. So it'll be interesting to see how Sadiq Khan responds to this and whether he'll do anything extra to get motorcycles access to London or not. All right, probably a slightly controversial view. But there you go. That's my thinking on it. All right, we need to ramp on a bit. Don't forget, you can catch the show Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. I have chopped off the Monday show for the moment. And as we move post-pandemic, or at least into a second stage dealing with it, I will keep an eye on whether or not I'm going to be continuing with Elevenses. It will continue in some form or another. I might just have to alter the way I deliver it to deal with my live training, because what I am doing is I am open for business as of tomorrow, 1st of June. As I mentioned a couple of times already, with the releasing of the sort of lockdown strategy and allowing non-essential businesses to open up if they can prove that they can pass various tests. I'm happy that with some modifications, by using some online techniques to deliver some of the briefings that I would normally do face to face, and by cutting down the hours that we actually spend on the road so that we don't need to use public facilities like toilets, I'm happy that my training can go ahead with reasonable level of safety. So, okay, that's what I'm doing. Now, I mentioned on Wednesday that we can ride an MP3 by Piaggio, a three-wheeler, on a car license. Now, here's another option. I'm just going to try and get the picture up for you. It's here somewhere. Come on, there. No, that's the wrong one. That's it. That's a Yamaha Tricity. Now, despite the name, it's not an electric bicycle, or tricycle, I should say. It's a contraction of Tri-City, referring to the three wheels rather than a shortening of electricity. And in some ways, I think it's a bit of a missed trick. So it's got a single-cylinder, liquid-cooled, four-stroke, single overhead cam, four-valve, 292cc motorcycle engine in it. It pumps out 20.6 kilowatts, and it's a V-belt automatic, so it's easy to ride. The latest model, which has been updated, is now Euro 5 standard. Worth knowing that older ones, which are still around, are Euro 4. So it's important to keep up with these emission regulations because they're only going to be ramped up in city centres to keep air clean. And some zones now being created which are accessible only to electric vehicles. And this is why I think something like the Tricity actually could have been redesigned with an electric motor. Now, battery-powered bikes have traditionally been seen as very heavy, but if you've ridden one of the recent models, I had the chance to test ride two of the Zero range last year, about this time. They've been coming down in weight quite rapidly, and some of the electric motorcycles are now actually lighter than their petrol-engined equivalents. But the problem is that the battery is still bulky. It takes up a lot of room within the motorcycle itself. And it seems to me that a three-wheel platform like this is actually an ideal way of stashing the battery. Okay, you've got all that gubbins holding the front forks up, but under the scooter bodywork, there's plenty of room to pop the power supply. Now, as I've said before, electric motorcycles certainly have the performance to deal with normal riding speeds. We have a limit, in case you hadn't noticed, of 70 miles per hour on dual carriageways and motorways. And electric bikes like the Zero have loads and loads and loads of acceleration. The top speed isn't particularly high, just over 100 miles an hour in the case of the two that I rode, but it's the way they get there that matters. So, you know, we can bang on about 186 mile an hour top speed motorcycles, and I'll be looking at one of those in just a moment, but they're pretty damned irrelevant on today's roads. But we've still got range anxiety issues. So one question that I still haven't seen addressed anywhere is, what about a hybrid? If you ride in a city centre, you're likely to find that the speed is now down to 20 miles per hour by law. And even where it isn't restricted by signs, it's usually crawling along thanks to the congestion. So really, there's no need for that 300cc motor in that Tricity. And there is, in fact, a 125 version, which will push the bike along at 60 miles per hour, which is enough, quite frankly, for most lightweight commuting. I wouldn't want to run down the motorway for 50 miles on one, but it'll certainly do a couple of miles of fast A road and the rest of the ride into town. But what happens when you get into the middle of the city? Well, then you don't really even need a 125. So why not make it with a battery a smaller battery than normal. It's something with just enough range to take you maybe the final 5 miles into a city centre and 5 miles out again. And as soon as you're out of the clean zone, then you switch your petrol engine back on and the bike can charge itself up. Now, that's the strategy that the Audi that I was driving in California used. Every time I drove into a town, I just switched over to the hybrid electric motor. And as soon as we got out of town and the speeds went up, it was back to the petrol engine. So the petrol engine worked where it was most fuel efficient, and the electric motor worked where I wanted to make the best of the clean power. And I honestly am surprised that nobody is following this up for a motorcycle. Yes, it means it's all probably going to be a little bit bulkier than a normal bike, but have a look at how compact a 100 or a 125cc motor actually is. They're not very big. You can get those tucked away inside something like the MP3 and still get an electric motor and battery in there. So the big plus with something like the Tricity, as I mentioned for the Piaggio, is that you can ride it on a car license. So there's something else that crossed my mind, which I hadn't mentioned. You can actually use this bike for both full motorcycle and full car license holders. Now, that actually makes it a pretty good family vehicle for a couple who only need a vehicle occasionally. You can't fully substitute a car with a motorcycle, but if you're simply, zipping around town and getting from A to B, then the something like the Tricity actually has a benefit. What it means is basically a biker in the family and a non-biker can both use it. So there's, one drawback. There always is a drawback, isn't there? And in this case, it's the price. I think the bike is hugely overpriced at £7,500. Now, most motorcyclists will think, what am I getting for my money? They'll look at the engine size. What's a 300cc bike priced at these days? Well, if you're looking at some of the Chinese bikes, you're looking at less than £4,000. Okay, they've all gone up in price. The CB 600, 500 range, the twins, are up over 6,000 now. They started at 5, but again, I think this needs to come down at least a couple of £1,000s. Right, okay. Don't forget, you will see me on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays for the foreseeable future. Make a date in your diary. I'm going to finish off with another motorcycle. Where is it? There it is. Have a look at that. That is what I think is a bit of a dinosaur. It's the MV Agusta Rush. It's super naked. It's 208 horsepower. It's restricted to 186 miles per hour. It could go faster with 208 miles an hour. 208 horsepower. And frankly, on a naked at 186 miles per hour, you will be clinging on for dear life. Somebody was asking me the other day, why get a bike with a lot of power? Well, I don't know. I honestly don't know. £30,000 for that. Somebody will buy it, no doubt, and probably park it outside the chip shop when you're allowed to park outside the chip shop again. But, what does that offer you that you can't do on a much smaller bike? And I honestly don't get it. I really don't get it. Meanwhile, Harley are also going the dinosaur route. Their 1868cc FX DR Power Cruiser is going for a short limited edition run. Just 30 are being built exclusively for the UK and Ireland, and they will be featuring custom paint design. Hand painted, it says white, black and gold. I haven't got a picture of it. And single piece drag bars to replace the standard models clip-ons. And that comes in at a fair bargain as £18,345. And frankly, for a special, it's not actually that expensive. It's only 350 quid more expensive than the base model, but still £1,800. I honestly wonder who will be buying these bikes in the next couple of years. I suspect that we are seeing the last of a dying breed of motorcycle here. They're about as if likely to survive this as the dinosaurs, I think. Right, okay, I'm going to hold over the last item which I was going to talk about, which would have followed on from that one about torque and thrust. I'll save that for next time, because we're already 11:38, 11:34, so we run a couple of minutes over, and if I do the next one, we'll run over even more. So apologies for that. I should have got my timing better, but hopefully you've enjoyed the show. Do consider popping over to my Ko-fi page. You will find over there not just the old videos from Elevenses, but you will also find various free content, and you'll find supporter and subscriber content too, which will give you access to my back catalogue of Facebook posts. There are well over 100 up already. I'm putting more up whenever I get a few minutes to transcribe them over, and also putting up the survival skills performance bends e-course. You can access that for as little as £3 a month. It'll give you all the theory with some illustrations and some videos on how I run my training out on the road. So do go over there and have a look. I was trying to do that and just put myself back full screen. So yeah, do go over there, have a look, and see if you enjoy the content. Right, okay, that's all for now. I've rambled on a bit today, but hopefully you found the content interesting as usual. I'll be back on Wednesday, so thanks very much for joining me here on Elevenses. So bye for now from Kevin Williams.